It's a great pleasure to introduce Guilheim Pepin, who will be known to many of you for his long work on Gascony in various forms and for a lot of work on the Gascon Rolls project, which I gather is almost coming to an end.
Yes, it is finished for my part. I have finished all the wars between 1399 and 1452. All the wars of the 15th century, because my colleague Simon Harris has finished also the wars between 1453 and 1467, the wars of the exiled people, you know, in England basically. And it's going to be available quite soon. Most of them are already online. And yes, I'm working on the history of Aquitaine Gascony for, I don't remember for how long, for a long time now. And I am a doctor of the University of Oxford. In fact, I worked with Malcolm Vale, and I have written a thesis about the relationship between the Gascons and the kings of England. So here I'm going to talk about the forms of the war in Aquitaine Gascony between 1400 and 1442. So the 100 Years' War was the longest war which was ever fought in Aquitaine Gascony. It is interesting to have a look on this war in this area, as the Duchy of Aquitaine, stretching from Bordeaux to Bayonne, had as Duke the King of England since 1154. We have to underline here that the term Guilheim was then an exact synonym of Aquitaine, and that his name was used for a vast area covering the provinces situated between Poitou, Rouergue, and the Pyrenees. Gascony denoted the area between the river Garonne and the Pyrenees. All that must be understood rather like Russian dolls, layer upon layer, Gascony being the region smaller than Aquitaine or Guienne. Of course, I want to talk about this period because we are celebrating, or maybe not celebrating from the French side, the Agincourt victory or defeat, it depends. And also the following, in fact, Lancastrian France in a certain way. And so that's why I ask the question, what happened in Aquitaine Gascony at this period? How war was fought there? Because in the end, it was the main possession of the English crown until the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. And it was the longest possession on the continent. So it's not at all out, in fact, of our interest, far from that. So first of all, I'm going to start by presenting you the great military operations that happened until 1442, leaving aside the last French offensives of the period 1449 to 1453, because there are too many things to say. I will give you first some detailed information on the war from the Anglo-Gascon side, then the role of the city of Bayonne in this conflict, and finally the guerrilla warfare led by some men-at-arms of the English party. First of all, the great military offensives in Aquitaine Gascony. You can see here a not very known painting representing Charles VII and his son Louis, the future Louis XI, and it was held at the Parliament of Toulouse. And you can see his armor. It's quite interesting, as well as the other illumination. So basically, I don't have a lot of time to develop that, but the main offensives implicating a lot of men were led by French because they had more resources and they had more men in a certain way. The resources of the English crown were in fact used mainly to defend England and Calais, and after, of course, to maintain the Lancastrian France. So basically, we had strings of offensives, French offensives between 1404 and 1407, and I've written an article about it in the Journal of Medieval Military History in, I don't remember when it was, in 2011, I think, and I get a prize for that from the Dere Military Society. So basically, you can see here an offensive by the Lord of Albret, Constable of France, in Périgord-les-Mousins, and another one led by the son of the Duke of Bourbon, Count of Clermont, and the son of the Count of Foix. We know the size of the army of the Constable of Albret, of Constable of France, and it was around 1,200 men-at-arms and 300 crossbowmen, and probably the other army had more or less the same size. So they are nice armies, but not very, very numerous. More important was the offensive of the Journée de Tartas, led by the King of France, Charles VII himself. And you can see his entry with the Dauphin Louis at Toulouse before the offensive. So this offensive was a massive one. I don't know, sadly, the size of the army of the King of France, because there's no detailed study of this campaign for the time being, curiously enough. So maybe it's my future task. So basically, what can I say? Just that the most important army that went to Gascony and to Aquitaine before was led by the Duke of Orleans in 1406, and it was an army of 5,000 or 6,000 men, probably. I suppose that the army of Charles VII was bigger than that, but I'm not sure of the exact amount of people. Still, this offensive was very important because it weakened a lot the Anglo-Gascon Aquitaine, particularly in the land, and most of the lands submitted to the French at this period. However, it is not because of that the Anglo-Gascon didn't try to replicate, and we know, for example, the offensive led by the community of Bordeaux between 1420 and 1424, mainly to recover the valley of the Garonne, in order probably to secure its trade, the trade of wine, of course, and also to secure to have barbicans in a certain way to protect Bordeaux itself. And we have also the offensive led by the Earl of Huntingdon, who was at this period Lieutenant of the King of England in Aquitaine, and he made operations mainly in Agenais. So we don't know exactly the size of these armies. Maybe I have to investigate more things in the National Archives. We never know. Still, it shows that the Anglo-Gascon were still reactive, and they tried, in fact, to counter the French, advances. Still, in the end of the war, at the end of the war in 1453, and after, several areas around Bordeaux and probably Bayonne and the lands and the surrounding regions were in a bad shape. A lot of people fled the regions to go, to be protected elsewhere, and also you had probably surges of, Black Death and or also trouble with wheat and corns. So in the end, a lot of regions around Bordeaux were depopulated, and they needed, in fact, at the end of the war and after, to have some colonial occupation in a certain way by people from Poitou, Limousin, and so on to repopulate the area. So now I'm going to talk about the day-to-day war according to the accounts of the Constable of Bordeaux. The Constable of Bordeaux was the treasurer of the Duchy of Aquitaine. And we are lucky enough to have kept within the British National Archives the request for validation of the accounts of the Constable of Bordeaux, Walter Coles, between 1434 and 1439, requesting to the Seneschal of Guilheim of Aquitaine and the Kings of England's Council based at Bordeaux, validation of his accounts. After that, the Seneschal, John Radcliffe, had to send a certification of the various expenses of the constable to the treasurer and barons of the English Exchequer based at Westminster. This is why we have now these rare documents. The expenses connected to the payment of the messengers sent by the seneschal, the constable, or the council of this king sitting in Bordeaux are copied into these documents. These messengers were sergeants at arms and royal sergeants of Gascon and English origin, who were also in charge of applying the court orders of the Anglo-Gascon government. We learn, for example, that in 1435, these sergeants summoned in Bordeaux to be present at the council of the king the following person: the Archbishop of Bordeaux, Peyberland, the Captal de Buch, Gaston de Foix, and the English captain of the fortress of La Réole, John Strangways. Similarly, in September 1437, a sergeant transmitted letters to the Captal of Buch, so that we have that he came to Bordeaux to the King's Council to decide on the resistance to be given against the troops of Rodrigo de Villandrando. Another thing. A Castilian mercenary leader of a mercenary troop allied to the French, who had invaded the duchy. Other sergeants contacted the lords of Duras, the lords of Montferrand and Uzat, and John Loaf, the captain of Connacht, a fortress situated on the Gironde estuary in Saintonge near Mirambeau. The contact was kept regularly in this way with the main Gascon lords of the English party and the captains of the main garrisons. The same month, the sergeants Janot of Bordeaux and John Chippenham were paid to carry sums of money to Marmande to the Anglo-Gascon men-at-arms who were in its garrison. Before November 1437, 120 sailors guarded Marmande, supervised by Harry Strangways, a lieutenant of the captain of La Réole, and probably his brother. And probably they had sailors and mariners keeping Marmande because they recruited them in the port of Bordeaux. The whole English garrison of Marmande was led by Amanieu de Madaillan, nicknamed the Baron. He was a local lord of the English party. The garrisons of Sainte-Foy-la-Grande, Caumont-sur-Garonne, and the castle of Guilheim in the south of Périgord were also paid by the lieutenant of the Constable of Bordeaux. The lieutenant of the Constable of Bordeaux also took care of their supply. In 1439, a merchant of Bristol and another of Bayonne received 108 francs for the delivery of 24 bushels of wheat for the provisioning of the castles of La Réole and Saint-Macaire. A ton of rye was supplied at the same moment to Saint-Macaire and 2 tons in La Réole. On the 3rd of April 1438, Chippenham received a payment to have assessed over 3 days the artillery kept at the castle of Fronsac. So I show you a culverin, a kind of culverin. And the castle of Fronsac was, since the execution of its lord, the Viscount of Fronsac, Guilheim Sans de Pommier, a fortress only occupied by English men-at-arms. There were no Gascons at all in Fronsac. The accounting documents give mentions of numerous deliveries of guns, coulevrines, engins de fer, and gunpowder, as well as some great steel crossbows, which were to be placed on the towers of the fortifications. They were sent to Bourg, Montségur, Sauveterre de Guyenne, Bazas, Comont-sur-Garonne, Marmande, and Castillonnès. This gives us a good idea of which places were deemed military important at this period, by the English party, of course. In November 1437, the sergeant Guillaume Duprat brought letters of the lieutenant of the seneschal and the king's council, supplicating the capital de Buch to go to the borders of the duchy with a company of men-at-arms to resist Rodrigo de Villandrando. Our documents give information on sieges by Anglo-Gascon troops of the fortified towns of Gamard in the Land in July 1435 and of Tonnes in December 1437. And Tonnes, I think, is here. Gamard is around here. Tonnes had previously been taken by the troops of Rodrigo de Villandrando. The Anglo-Gascon government had troops on all the duchy, including from the Basque country. The town finally surrendered in January 1438, following an agreement made between Rodrigo de Villandrando and the Anglo-Gascon government through Lope Nuco, the representative of Rodrigo, who came to Bordeaux. The prisoners of the troops of Rodrigo who had been taken had to be freed without ransom, and a souffert had to be arranged with Rodrigo. The customary spies of French military preparations often seem to have been members of a religious order. So on the 18th of July 1435, 4 francs were paid to Joan de Lignon, a brother Carmelite, who had been sent to the land of Albret, so basically this area. So he has been sent to the land of Albret for this task of espionage. Also on the 6th of November 1437, 2 francs are given to a brother Carmelite who had previously been sent to the valley of the Garonne. And the same sum was paid to a Dominican who had made the same thing in the valley of the Dordogne. We also learned news from the trumpet of the captain of the fortress of Limeuil on the valley of the Dordogne in Périgord. But there were also spies and other traitors on the French side, and we have several mentions of sergeants going to collect one of the or 2 traitors jailed at Gensac, La Brède, or Connac. Now I'm going to talk about the role of the communities, the big communities, in the wars in Aquitaine, and particularly I'm going to focus on the community of Bayonne. Among the leading players of the Hundred Years' War in Aquitaine are the 2 main communities of the English Gascon Duchy, Bordeaux and Bayonne. We are not going to develop here the major military role which had Bordeaux in the first half of the 15th century. This has been recently worked on by Vincent Or at the University of Bordeaux with the help of the surviving registers of the town council of Bordeaux called Jurade. And it has been 2 articles of Vincent Or have been published in the journal called the Annales du Midi. But we are going to evoke here the role of Bayonne, the main port for construction of ships of the duchy and the one which supplied the majority of its mariners. Though it knew that a decline because of the silting up of the river Adour, as the mouth of the river had moved from Cap Breton to Vieux-Boucau around 1400. Let us focus on the year 1419, on which we have quite a bit of information. Contrary to the rest of the pro-English Duchy of Aquitaine, Bayonne and its region also had to fight their Castilian neighbours, who had been allied with France since the 1360s. On the 12th or 13th of August 1419, a Castilian army gathered in Biscay and in Guipuscoa, and led by Fernand Perez de Ayala, governor of Guipuscoa and son of the famous chronicler, and the Doctor Gonzalo Moro, governor of Biscay, invaded the land called Labour. It was a region stretching from the Bidassoa to Bayonne. And basically, they tried to attack the most southern part of the Anglo-Gascon Duchy of Aquitaine. A paper on this has been recently published by Michel Bochaca and Emmanuel Bitores Casado in the French historical journal called Les Annales du Midi. If we combine the various sources evoking this episode, the Castilians would have ravaged Labour by cutting apple trees, producing cider, then the favorite drink of this region, as well as the places of Saint-Jean-de-Luz and Biarritz. This Castilian offensive was probably associated with the sending of a maritime force to the King of France, Charles VII. The Bayonnais and the Labourdins then tried to take revenge by leading a maritime raid against Castile by burning the city of Guilheim in the Asturias. Bayonne also had to contribute, like Bordeaux, to the English war effort in the north of France by supplying food, crossbowmen, whalers, and by building a big warship named La Grâce Dieu. It was around 1419. And this name, La Grâce Dieu, was also used for a big warship built at the same moment at Southampton. And there's a paper, I think, this afternoon about that. But in reality, Bayonne had to concentrate its efforts on the Castilian threat, always present for the garrison of Fontarabie, and sent only little or no support for Henry V. And if the construction of La Grâce Dieu seemed relatively advanced in April and May 1419, in spite of a shortage of timber, we do not know whether it was ever delivered to Henry V. I'm going to finish. Oh, yeah. Nice Bayonnais ship. I'm going to finish with in talking a little bit about the partisan war of the English party. And it was a very important feature of the war in Aquitaine and the neighboring regions, because a lot of remains of the routier of the 14th century still existed in Périgord, in Limousin, in Quercy, and so on. And they tried to survive and to continue the war without any help from the English treasury in obtaining what we call pâtis or souffrance from the local, governments, local regions, and towns, and so on. And the pâtis were in fact truces signed for some months or maybe 1 year, 2 years in exchange of money. And we have the example here of the castle of Mercoès, situated near Cahors. And this castle had been taken by some men under the authority of the Captal de Buch Gaston de Foix in 1426. But regularly, the local governments and the local town councils tried, in fact, to remove these garrisons in trying to pay off, of course, the garrisons, but also sometimes to act against them with military efforts. And it was a case for Marquess. Marquess had been was besieged by an army led by the Cahors municipality and some local lords in August and September 1428. And we have here the narrative of the siege of Marquess. And for them, it was the most important expedition, military expedition they have organized for 50 years. So probably it was not very important before, because it was an important expedition for them, but still it was not a very, very important, a military army. So we know, according to these narratives, that the Captal de Buch Gaston de Foix tried to break the siege led by the city of Cahors, and he arrived on the other side of the river Lot on the 7th of September 1428. So he had more or less the view we have here. He arrived on this side of the river. But the castle of Marquess was surrounded by Bastille, made of wood, and ship, fortified ship with guns and culverin and so on, had been put on the lot in order to avoid any help from the other side of the lot, or the other bank, and also to avoid people of the castle to take water from the Dordogne. The Captal de Buch, and you can see his stole plate from Windsor, because he was Knight of the Garter, came with 1,500 horses, roussins they call that. So I don't know how many men were with him in reality. It's quite difficult to tell, but it's quite an important army for the period and for the region. Still, when he saw the fortifications and all the things organized by Cahors, he preferred to negotiate, but negotiate to a high price, because he obtained the sum of 1,600 moutons d'or. And the mouton d'or was this coin with a piece of Damas. So it's quite an important, in fact, sum of money. And still, it proves that in a late period like 1428, Anglo-Gascon were still able to lead expeditions far from Bordeaux and the region of Bordeaux. And that sort of expeditions are only documented in local documents, like here in Cahors, and we have nothing about them in the Northern Chronicles, of course, and also in the administration, the Anglo-Gascon administration, because they were not paid by them, basically. They were totally paid by the Captal de Buch and people like that. So, to conclude, I will talk a little bit about the Gascon service outside Aquitaine. For example, the Captal de Buch didn't fight only in Aquitaine, Gascony. He went, for example, in Normandy and fought with Henry V. And I found at the British Library a letter of the Captal de Buch of the 22nd of April 1419, written at Vannes in Brittany. And he explained to Henry V he has sent his servant Ramon de la Nau to him, and Henry V was then based at Vernon in Normandy. So he had a service in Normandy and in France, in fact Ile-de-France, and it is because of that he was made Count of Longueville, a title formerly used by Du Guesclin. And Longueville is in Normandy. So it was quite a prestigious promotion for him, even if it was not acknowledged by the Dauphin party, by Charles VII's party, of course. We can mention as well the Lord of Montferrand. Montferrand was situated near Bordeaux in the commune of Bassins now. So the Lord of Montferrand, Bertrand III, was a member of the household of the Duke of Bedford, regent of France for the King Henry VI, and was succeeded in marrying his second son, Pay de Montferrand, with a bastard daughter of Bedford called Mary. We can also mention Jean du Bourdieu, Archdeacon of the Médoc, and a Gascon doctor of the University of Oxford, Chancellor of Guilheim, who became Vicar of Harfleur in 1415. After the conquest of this town, he died there in 1416 and was presumably buried there. That is according to his will, because we don't know exactly if he was buried in Harfleur, but we have his will, fortunately enough, in the National Archives of Britain. Bourdieu has also been proposed, and it's a suggestion of Anne Curry. I didn't know that. Was also proposed as author of the Gesta Henrici Quinti, and wrote an important letter from the siege camp at Harfleur to the Jurade of Bordeaux. I knew that. That spoke of Henry's plans to move on next to attack Montvilliers, Dieppe, Rouen, and Paris. So, well, it was just a general presentation of the war in Aquitaine, and further, in fact, investigations are needed in the National Archives, but also sometimes in French archives, the National Archives, of course, Bibliothèque Nationale, and local archives sometimes. Because, like I said, for the expedition to Tartas, the Journée de Tartas of Charles VII, nothing has been done about all these episodes, and the war was mainly the historians of war of this period were mainly focused on northern France, Normandy, Calais, Flanders, and so on. So it's not to dismiss; it is interesting, of course, but sadly enough, the oldest, in fact, possession of the English crown on the continent has been a little bit neglected and needs more work on it. So I thank you.